So let's begin on your book. It outlines 3 stages of ignorance, to me, which sounds like stages of grief. You know, this is group therapy here. The first is ridicule, the second is acceptance, and the third is celebration of ignorance.
Yes.
How did we get started on this path of ignorance that you've outlined? I'm laughing already, so.
Well, I'm glad you're enjoying what you're saying, Randall. It's great because you can talk to yourself all day like this and keep yourself in a state of delight.
Yeah, just keep you grinning.
I mean, you don't need those psychedelics that Michael Pollan's got. You can just do it yourself.
Yeah.
Well, I want to get into that. First, I want to get a sense of the lay of the land here a little bit. Are there any Borowitz Report readers here tonight? Okay. Well, for those of you who aren't familiar with the Borowitz Report, every day I make shit up. That's sort of what I do. It's kind of like, are you familiar with Sean Hannity? Yes, it's in that genre. He's actually my main competition. But there was actually big news today. I don't know did you read the big news about Rupert Murdoch? Yes. He has begun his transition from Fox News to hell, which I think is exciting. But that's an example of my reporting at the Borowitz Report. It's made up news, and the book is a real departure from that because the book is 100% true. It's all factual. It's a history book, and everything in it actually happened, unfortunately, I should add, because I really did research on ignorance among our politicians and how it has increased over the past 50 years. And when I got into this, I realized that ignorance is nothing new in our politicians. We've always had dumb politicians. Will Rogers, the great American humorist, had a great line, which I'm always quoting, which is he said, "There's no trick to being a political humorist when you have the whole government working for you." And I mean, that's basically true, always true. But something happened in the last 50 years, 50, 60 years, which is that we had this rise in mass media really governing our politics. And what that meant was that politicians had to start becoming kind of zoo animals and performers rather than knowledgeable people who knew actually how to do their jobs and how to make our lives better. And the 3 phases that you described, ridicule, acceptance, and celebration, break down very simply like this, and then I want to talk about some of the main heroes of these phases. In the ridicule phase, which is, I mean, some people in the audience might remember this, kind of a halcyon era of the 50s and before, where we expected our politicians to know shit. So dumb politicians had to pretend to be smart. Now, in the acceptance phase, which happened more or less in the 80s and 90s and beyond, being ignorant started becoming a sign of authenticity. It meant you were a regular guy, somebody you'd want to have a beer with. And so dumb politicians felt free to appear dumb. And now we're in the celebration phase where we celebrate ignoramuses over experts and people who don't know things over people who've read books. And so now we're in this weird phase where everything has been turned upside down and smart politicians have to pretend to be dumb. So that's where we are. Good night, everybody. That's our show. I'm going to leave you on that suicidal note. So you might ask, like, how this started. Where did we go from ridicule to acceptance to celebration? A key inflection point that I like to talk about is the 1960 debate between John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon, because believe it or not, that was the first televised debate. And both Nixon and Kennedy were really well-informed guys. And if you listen to that debate on the radio, anecdotally, a lot of people thought that Nixon won. But people who watched it on TV thought Kennedy won because Kennedy was better looking, he wasn't sweaty like Nixon, he appeared to have shaved in the last week, and this is not a small point, he had fucking fantastic hair. And in politics, hair is so important. It's like, if you look at like John F. Kennedy, look at your own Rick Perry, right? Rick Perry had only 3 things going for him: great hair, great suits, and I can't remember the third. Oops. I can't. Oops. Sorry, I had to do that. Because I'm in Texas. I had to do that joke. But this debate, what happened was Kennedy won the debate, he won the election, and this taught like the political pros a very dangerous lesson. And it's like a genie that we can never put back in the bottle, which is to be president, you have to be good on TV. So cut to 6 years later, 1966, California, a bunch of Republican industrialists want to take back the governor's mansion. And they try to reverse engineer this whole problem of being good on TV as a politician. They say, instead of finding a politician who's really knowledgeable and teaching him how to be good on TV, we're just going to find somebody who's really awesome at being on TV, and we're going to sort of funnel enough sound bites into him so that he sounds intelligent enough to be governor. Uh-oh. There you go again. That's right. Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was the sort of the test tube baby of this whole horrible process. And what they did is, Ronald Reagan was a big TV star. He had been on the GE, General Electric Hour, and then he'd been on Death Valley Days. He was basically unemployed at this point, but he was good looking. He could look down the barrel of a TV camera and be very, very sincere. There was only one problem with Ronald Reagan, which was that he knew absolutely nothing. I mean nothing. Ronald Reagan now is sort of deified as like the great communicator and this guy who like ended the Cold War and everything. And he said, tear down that wall, showing a tremendous mastery of monosyllabic words. But Ronald Reagan knew absolutely nothing. Here's an example of the ignorance of Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan, when he was president of the United States, did not know that South America was composed of different countries. That is true. He said, it's amazing. He came back from a trip to South America, was blown away by the fact that they had all these different countries down there. He also thought that trees polluted more than cars did. And he honestly said this, and when he was campaigning in 1980, he went to Claremont College in California, and the students at Claremont College tacked a sign to a tree that said, chop me down before I kill again. So, Ronald Reagan was trained he was taught all these sound bites, and he won the election in California by over 1 million votes. And we have never really looked back from that point because it taught a very dangerous lesson, which is you have somebody who's good on TV and seems knowledgeable enough, and that's enough to elect somebody. And it worked then, and it was tried again less successfully in 1988. They had this guy, Stu Spencer, who was kind of the Svengali who masterminded Ronald Reagan's campaign. He was brought on board in 1988 by the Republicans, not to manage George H.W. Bush, but to manage his vice presidential candidate, a guy who you may remember named Dan Quayle. I don't know if that name rings a bell. Am I bringing back terrible nightmares now just by uttering that name? But that's, Stu Spencer tried to do that Reagan magic all over again with Dan Quayle, and it utterly failed. Now, in the book, and though some of you have maybe thumbed through it, I'm a little bit hard on Dan Quayle. And I've got to tell you something, what's more important to me than anything as a man is to be fair. I think when you hear the name Andy Borowitz, the first thing that occurs to you is fairness, right? Always very bipartisan, always looking to the other side, trying to be generous. And so I actually reached out to Dan Quayle to see if he would join us at the Progressive Forum tonight. I emailed him, and he wrote back and he said he was otherwise enraged. But because I'm so fair, I was thinking, who tonight at the Progressive Forum, who will speak for Dan Quayle? And I think it falls upon me to do so. And so I've actually brought with me some of the wisdom of Dan Quayle. This is actually the complete knowledge of Dan Quayle, unabridged. And I'm going to, this is word for word things that Dan Quayle actually said. And, you know, we're going to try to rebuild his legacy here tonight in Houston. Okay. This is Dan Quayle on education. Quite frankly, teachers are the only profession that teach our children. Ferris Bueller's Day Off is my favorite movie because it reminds me of my time in school. You take the United Negro College Fund model that what a waste it is to lose one's mind, or not to have a mind is being very wasteful. How true that is. Dan Quayle on geography. We have a firm commitment to Europe. We are a part of Europe. I love California. I practically grew up in Phoenix. It's wonderful to be here in the great state of Chicago. Dan Quayle on outer space. Space is almost infinite. As a matter of fact, we think it is infinite. For NASA, space is still a high priority. It's time for the human race to enter the solar system. Shall I go on? Why stop now? Dan Quayle on the vice presidency. One word sums up probably the responsibility of any vice president, and that one word is to be prepared. Dan Quayle, master detective. When I've been asked during these last weeks who caused the riots and the killing in LA, my answer has been direct and simple. Who is to blame for the riots? The rioters are to blame. Who is to blame for the killings? The killers are to blame. You're getting good at this. You will suffer permanent brain damage as a result. All right, Dan Quayle, time traveler. I have made good judgments in the past. I have made good judgments in the future. That is my favorite, actually. The future will be better tomorrow. The real question for 1988 is whether we're going to go forward to tomorrow or past to the back. And finally, because you've been so patient, Dan Quayle on family values. Illegitimacy is something we should talk about in terms of not having it. And finally, Republicans understand the importance of bondage between parent and child. There you go. Okay.